Hey folks, Grant from Gunspot here for thearmorylife.com. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the technique that I use to mount up a scope and zero on a bolt action rifle. Okay, so before we get going into the technique that I use, I want to thank Winchester for sending us this Deer Season XB. Man, in this time where ammunition is tight, you guys came in big for us. We appreciate it, and it has shot really well for us as well. So we have our Waypoint 2020, and we're going to set up an optic and zero it using my particular technique. Now, I will say that there are bore sighters that you can invest in, and it will do an even more refined job. But the technique that I have used for years, because technology sometimes, you know, leaves you hanging, is a real simple method. First, I of course, with an empty gun, I take my bolt out, and I'm going to use that bolt being out to kind of naked bore sight is what I call it. Now, what I'll do is I'll look down the bore itself. I'll position the rifle via sandbagging onto a spot onto the target. And then I'll take my optic, and if you're like me, you've got, you know, half a dozen optics sitting around with rings already applied so that I can put them on a rifle. And I'm going to put them into a notch. And the first thing that I want to do is set the eye relief. It's does you no good if you're really straining out like turtle, you know, head coming out of the shell to get good eye relief. So I want to find that notch where the optic sets well for me and I'm comfortable on the stock. So a little bit of adjustment range, and then we'll torque it in and start our zeroing process. All right, so that is the notch that I prefer. And a little bit about the tools that I use. For years, I've been a big fan of Seekonk specific inch-pound torque wrenches. This is a 65 inch-pound, which is the torque setting for Badger Ordnance rings. I get them set into the notch that I like. I push the rings forward. I get them good and snug on both sides, and then I go right to my full 65 inch-pound torque setting. From there, I go back. My bolt's already been removed. I'm gonna get my rifle leveled out. I'm gonna look down my bore. I'm gonna, here at 100 yards, it becomes a little bit of a challenge sometimes to see something specific through the bore that I can move my scope to. But here on the Gunspot range, it's not that difficult. So I'm centered up on an 8-inch gong. I look to my optic, and right now I'm about 4 mils high. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drop my mils down 4 mils. And how I determine that I am 4 mils high is utilizing the great reticle system that is present in this FDN 25. So I've brought it down 4 mils to where I'm centered of the plate. I'm gonna double check that I didn't move the rifle around. And where I really need to be, I did move it around a little bit, so I'm gonna move it back up. And now I'm gonna adjust my windage because I am left of center as well. And let me get it back on. I'm about 1.5 mils to the left. And go back in again. And so I'm trying to put that 8-inch gong in my view, looking down the bore, in the center of the bore as closely as I can. Like I said, a bore sight does a much more refined job of this. However, doing this at 100 is going to get you pretty doggone close if you can hold the rifle still enough. So I move that in. I'm centered. I look in my optic, and I'm just a smidge to the right now. So I back it off. I'm going to check it one more time. And I moved it too much. Okay, so now my reticle is showing in the middle of the plate, just like in theory. Of course, my naked eye isn't going to be as precise as a magnified optic, but it's going to get me really close ballpark-wise so that I'm not wasting unnecessary ammo. Now I can put my bolt back in and get ready to fire my first shots. Okay, so after I've taken my first shot, hopefully I have a clean witness panel so that I can actually make or find that first round impact. Don't expect for it to be point of aim, point of impact using the naked bore sighting method, or with a bore sighter for that matter. If you can get it on an 8.5 by 11-inch piece of paper, you're doing a good job, which where I hit my first shot was roughly 2, 3, 4 inches high and about 1¼ inches to the right. So now I'm going to make some fine-tuning adjustments. And so at 100 yards, a mil is roughly 3.6 inches. So I'm going to drop down 3.6. I'm going to take my next shot. So right now I'm about 3/8 of an inch to the right of dead center. So literally using this technique with an optic that's never been on this rifle before, 2 shots down range. Of course, the first shot would have killed any deer at 100 yards, but the second shot is under an inch from dead center. I'm using this naked bore sighting technique that I've been using for years. Gonna fire off our second shot to make sure that first one wasn't just a fluke and I jerked it in. All right, guys, total of 4 shots fired. This rifle is zeroed utilizing our Winchester Deer Season XB. Okay, so last thing but not least, whenever we zero our rifle, if you have what are commonly referred to as target knobs, especially when they're excellent target knobs like this FDN 25X has, you have the ability to reset what you see behind the rifle to 0. That way you don't get lost in how much adjustment you put on. You know it needs to go back to 0. Now you still could over travel, but it helps you not go too far or too little in your returning to your 100-yard or 200-yard zero, whichever you prefer. So any scope that has target knobs is going to have an ability to do this. How this particular model operates from US Optics, which I really like, it has two Allen head screws, one on each side of a stainless Allen head screw, which I'm going to assume is for setting zero stop. I haven't looked that far into it yet, but holding to make sure you don't accidentally adjust it, you're going to unscrew those two Allen heads, and I've already removed one just to save time. And once I undo the other, it's going to allow me to pick that knob all the way up. So once I've picked that knob all the way up, I can turn the zero back and position it on my vertical body line. That way I know I'm at zero, and then I'll retighten that set screw. So we've got our elevation reset to zero. Now it's time to do the same for windage. In this particular model scope, it has a different setup for doing that. It has a single screw, Allen screw in the side, so I would take it out and then reset to zero and screw it back together, and now I would be at zero on both my elevation and my windage. The last thing I'm going to do before I put my rifle away or put it in the bag to go out on my hunt or whatever I'm going to do is I'm going to make a physical reference of where my zero is. Now what that really means is if my rifle scope doesn't have zero stop that I can set so it can't go below my zeroing distance, I can use an old school method of counting the rotations down until I run out, so that if I do get lost in my elevation, I can just run it to the very bottom and then return it that many adjustments up to my 100-yard zero. So let's do this. If up is pushing to my right, I'm going to pull back to my left, and I'm going to see exactly how many rotations before bottom on this particular scope. I have exactly 6 mils down before I run out of adjustment. So I can go back up anytime by counting 6 up from the bottom, and I know I'm at my 100-yard zero. So you might not be a big long-range shooter. Maybe you're just one that you just want to know whether your rifle is off or not. I will tell you that zero stop is nice. If you've got it, definitely use it. I had a situation that happened to me years ago where I was flying with my sniper rifle, and I got an inspection notice from the TSA that they had opened the case and had looked into it. I wasn't present at the time. This is close to 20 years ago. And my zero, or my elevation, was just slightly off when I opened my rifle up out of the case. And generally, I didn't always take advantage of the zero confirmation before starting the match, but this particular situation I did. And what I'd found out was somebody, assuming it was TSA because they had access, had got in and they had spun my dial a complete rotation around. Now this is going to date me, but I was running a 5 minute of angle adjusting turret, so I was almost 6 minutes off of my zero, so roughly 6 inches at 100 yards. And so by knowing where the bottom is in your reticle, if it does get bumped, you don't have to worry if it just got bumped a little or somebody was jacking around with your stuff and moved you off a bunch. I can go to the bottom and then count it back up to your 100-yard zero, and then you know, and you don't have any lingering doubts rolling around in your head when that big buck comes into view. All right, folks, this has been how to mount up and zero your bolt action rifle. And remember, train hard, your family deserves it.